Yeah, I want to say something about my American Express Bluebird card. It's a 15-digit card called the American Express Bluebird card. It's 15 digits, okay? And it has like a security code on the front and back, and the 4-digit security code is on the front, like MP4, and the 3 security code on the back. It's like MP3. But anyway, so like, I mean, it presents all that stuff, and it's kind of like, it's gotten to the point to whether, you know, Capital One is like, what's in your wallet? Yeah, what is in my wallet? I mean, what is Capital One stating that Capital One is presenting, you know, human capital in the form of, like, on the expenditure side, manufacturing what economics has provided as availability, and manufacturing something other than maybe the thought of a vice president network having control of having fair use of car. I mean, what is it really about? I mean, is it really about birth certificate, citizenship and birthrights, or a carbon footprint, or a vice president network having fair use of information but not claiming the ownership of it? So, like, I have an American Express. I've been presenting some information, and it seemed to be the only thing about, you know, it seemed to be the importing and exporting side of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement has presented some whether or not of the idea of like a suppression and loss prevention is the only side of the monetary and domestic aggregates that's presenting the issue with neighborhoods as a boycott and embargo, presenting the idea of like what deed restrictions would be, and I mean, really, I mean, if it seemed to be really, if it's going to be really the thought of a mechanics lien. I mean, you know, I haven't heard, I mean, like, not one word about, you know, Marcus Welby or, you know, Quincy. Yeah, it seemed to be the thing about, you know, medical power of attorney used in fiction and real estate as a deed restriction, from like Marcus Welby all the way to like Quincy, and it presents sequencing like Quincy. It's like sequencing, okay, but normally that involves, like, you know, quantum and certain types of digital signal processing and customizing waveform involving sequencing and programming. And the thing with this is kind of like a, you know, back then I knew about sequencing, but I didn't really look at like Quincy as like a you know, a sigma alpha delta kappa phi. See, what is this? Sigma alpha delta kappa phi. The 23 English alphabetical letters that seem to have the significance of, like, you know, W being the 23rd letter, and the 23-year anniversary of, like, Dr. Pepper, and the 23 ingredients, and it seemed to be, you know, the significance of the W and the G, and where it seemed to matter the most, it seemed to be whether when human capital getting what seemed to be like going through a circuit, getting some idea of itemization beyond, you know, thought of non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization, as some like idea of making some kind of grade and going beyond the thought of and getting on the human capital side of like expenditures going through the circuit, and the thing about the Bluebird card seemed that it hopefully led to the, you know, the idea of the AirBusH 160 you know, horizontally propelled aircraft. I like calling them horizontally propelled aircraft more so than helicopters. And it seemed to be the significance of the Bluebird bus. You know, and the thing with this is kind of like a, you know, the thing with this is that there's the rainbow thing, and it seemed to be the significance of one. I mean, it seemed to be the one and only that I know of, but the guy's like walking in circles, and it's like a controlled issue that you would normally see like on cops, or, you know, city under siege, or, you know, in any case, so like the guy's like walking in circles, and he says that he does more so he can work longer hours, so he can make more, so he can get more. And it's like a never-ending cycle, okay? But he's walking in circles, and everything's like starting to disappear around him, and the furniture and everything. And then the song comes on, I have always been chasing rainbows, waiting for little bluebirds. And it seemed to be that's where the American Express Bluebird card comes in, the Bluebird bus going through the circuit, and the AirBusH is that one commercial about that song, because the rainbows, it seemed to be that going through the circuit seemed to be the thing about, the bluebird bus, and ultimately even getting to the Israeli bird, the whoopa, the blue and purple bird. Blue and purple being alphanumerics of 128, or, blue being 40, or, purple being 88. It's kind of like the New Deal Act for like being 88, or Mormon, or the 88 thing about Trump, or whatever the case may be, or the ultimate bill, Delta 88. And all that connectivity it seemed that it had ultimately got to the thought of like, operators are like really presenting the issue with like, I mean, what is it really? I mean, what's in your wallet? Yeah, and I was kind of like wondering, what's the deal about the American Express card? What is it about the operators? Is it that being an American Express card? I mean, so what's the real issue? I hadn't heard a word yet other than like a bunch of nothing. I mean, it's a prepaid card, okay? It's a 15-digit prepaid card, okay? And I hadn't gone to any extent other than like being on the phone, but it's been a repeated deal on the phone, and hadn't been like really cool about talking to like anyone at this point, because it seemed to be like even Capital One and financial institutions is presenting some idea of what a vice president network has meant to a carbon footprint as some idea of having fair use as intellectual property in the form of like, but not claiming ownership of the rights. And it's almost like, Capital One saying, hey, what's in your wallet? Well, hey, yeah, what is in my wallet? I mean, is it the American Express presenting some idea of citizenship and birthrights, or is it presenting, whether or not if a boycott and embargo is only the thought of maybe loss prevention as a method of banking, or in other words, maybe just keeping someone in the bank? I mean, that's the only way, that's really only what I see boycott and embargo really about, as far as like a transportation in a way of like commerce sometimes dictating what's on or offshore in that way, or what internet protocol or local area network seem to think is some thing about it. Yeah, so like anyway, in maritime law it seems to be whether or not if a signal strength is ultimately only getting to the thought of like ultimately just being in the neighborhood seemed to be really the deal. But the thing about the American Express card, it's kind of like I have had continual issues about actually getting anyone sounding like they're like an American English, person about American Express. I've seen the financial institutions seem like even pencils kind of like in on it, having to say whatever it is they have to say, and Capital One and all these different financial institutions that sound like they're just taking their turn, telling me whatever they want to tell me about, like when I call the number on my American Express card. So I'm going to have to actually do something about that, other than talking on the phone about it, But it seems to be like it's really presenting, the confrontational, perception of like, that would lead to maybe some idea of like a, anything other than like a normal conversation. In any case, so like it's kind of like get a little, really not cool, upset a little bit about that, because it seemed to be whether or not if if ultimately if it's the idea of like leaving the bank and getting up and getting all American about a degree level representatives, yeah, sure, and all that good stuff about the misappropriation allocation of Mississippi and the international superstar and a supplemental security in that way, and so like anyway, so like I'm trying to like decide whether or not if I'm going to put some time into kind of maybe organizing this stuff and doing a little bit. I had a bunch of equipment, but I went ahead and sold some of my other equipment with my drums, because I'm just going to get everything like all blue chromium. I'm going to go all blue with everything. So it'll be blue chromium, like simple stands, drum throne, and hardware, and with the Provision Strata Blue and the pasty Color Sound 900, the blue symbols, So like anyway, so like I just want to include that because it seemed to be like whether or not, it just seemed to be like an ongoing issue whether or not if Pennzoil is kind of like, throwing in a little bit of television programming from New York in on the conversation, just talking about American Express here in the Houston area. I mean, it seemed to be like really, some idea that that Prince-Oil has given some kind of impression of I'd say that really it seemed to be a little bit about the New York television programming, about it being like 111 like New York as well as Pennzoil, and I'd gotten that impression because continually I've been having issues on like a phone about on my AOL. Continually, it's presenting the issue of contesting factors of like a preference, just like presenting like an issue as so like I'm gonna have to like really do something a little bit more than maybe just like think that so like it really had been really cool about me just having a normal day, really. In any case, so like so it presents all those issues that seem to be I'm not trying to have any coping skills as a consistent ongoing issue over just a normal conversation, and I have been having that. It seemed to be like the deal about performance monitoring. It's a foreknowledge. It's presenting the when and where, kind of like hey, gotta be kidding me. So like any case, so like I'm trying to get over the thought of like what managing factors seem to think based upon perception would only be maybe the thought of maybe a method of holding. I mean, ultimately, loss prevention is the idea, like what intellectual duration is to only what lifespan means. There seemed to be that a lot of confrontational distractions had led to a different perception, other than the description for the reason of the call to begin with. That's been happening quite a bit. It's like so like beyond like not cool. It's unreal. So like and ultimately it seemed to be that really ultimately it seemed to be like whether or not if between Los Angeles and New York television programming, I mean if it's really going to decide whether or not if there's going to be like a real change, I guess, in television programming. I kind of like to see that change would be like really good. As far as like the thought of it as a method of banking, it seemed to be that whether or not if the way the book Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, the way it describes the history of the U.S. dollar below the equator, and in South America, ultimately, Latin terminology, really kind of like not cool. Certain factors about that, but it seemed to be that really whether the degree level of reputable standards of consistent participation is some transition at an academic level. It presents that as Latin in that one waveform, knowing that one cycle of frequency that would give the pronunciation over the letter N, and knowing that it's Latin terminology, and how the Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country identifies all the history of the U.S. dollar. And then it ultimately gets to the 8 ohms and redundant frequency, or the delta force, or some idea of a grid within signal strength, and what that is to neighborhoods of monetary and domestic. And it's ultimately, I mean, all this is like not taught. I mean, it's all available information. Even knowing to look for it, or even knowing, I mean, looking right at it, reading it, and everything, and not having the connectivity. I mean, it's so like that so very much sometimes. Having like all the information, and just like it's not clicking as far as the connectivity. It's unreal, because it's not really taught like a circuit's not normally like the thought of like being taught. How everyone is like participating in a circuit, and everyone's not like really aware of like what everyone does in their level, but anyway, so it's kind of like it comes with the years of experience. The thing with this is that it seems to be that whether or not if that one cycle is identifying the thought of the history of the U.S. $1 as Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. You see, I'm not a Colombian, okay? Okay, born in Texas, okay? I'm not trying to have an issue just because of the operator of the equator is some idea of the District of Columbia, or television, or Washington being the alphabetics 130, or television, or electronic God, or direct circuit, or dimensional clause, based upon an alphanumeric perception, other than Washington D.C. being thought automatically District of Columbia. The thing with this is that with all that information, I have not heard not one time in my entire life that information being identified as Washington D.C. as the District of Columbia, representing Latin America, and the secret of the temple, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, and the history of the U.S. dollar, the history of the U.S. $1, the history of the U.S. dollar below the equator, and in Latin America involving the mammon. And in the way of the way it's presented, it's kind of like it's kind of like the biblical scripture, the root of all evil is money. Well, that's my U.S. dollar, not really that at all. But it's kind of like, really, I mean, I think that really, that ultimately, that the thing it is that that frequency, that half cycle above and below, identifying over the letter N, and how it seemed to be the thing of OSHA, Occupational Safety Health Administration, the acronym OSHA with that N, and the foundation in SAN software, importing and exporting in the way of like international financial management of SAN software, that involves like importing and exporting and like immigration, customs enforcement, and certain factors of international financial management that way, more so the degree levels than so like anyway, so like all the practical application and principles that way. But it seemed to be that one cycle, that half above and below with that N, is it kind of like, I mean, symbolically and analytically identifies, the history of the U.S. dollar in Latin terminology with the letter N, the 14th letter. So it seemed to have significance, and here's the thing: is that is one, knowing where it goes. I mean, years of process of elimination and analytical, and like where does it need to go? And that's where it seemed to go. And and I mentioned Barack Obama had mentioned that he's trying to demonize you, okay? And the thing is that I don't know if he's really referring to demonize YouTube, or what EA Sports seemed to be, or the Return of the Jedi and some Star Wars issue. In any case, so like, he'd refer to the Al Qaeda on their own communications networking, okay, but it doesn't really identify Cricket Wireless as the Pulse Club in Florida, representing all that information being sold in Pearland, Texas. Although that being on television with Barack Obama saying that, in my on my television, and I don't know if it's just my television, I don't everyone on the entire planet, but in any case, I'm the one watching it and heard it and all that. So like it seemed to be the information with the Post Club in Florida and all that information when Barack Obama was like talking about certain factors involving Al Qaeda, and it was like on the news separately, and as Florida, the Pulse Club, that is actually a phone that is sold by Cricket Wireless. The Pulse phone is Cricket Wireless. But the thing is it's like it's almost like the Latin terminology involving jurisprudence with a black back. I mean, it's like a black nation, okay? It's that one song, Black Velvet and That Little Boy Smile, Black Velvet and That Soul Southern Style. I mean, it's like a boycott embargo, like in the governmental structure, and some color code of constitutional law and state statutes annotated. Black Velvet and That Little Boy Smile, Black Velvet and That Soul Southern Style. I mean, it's kind of like, above or below sea level, and in the depths of like a governmental structure, such as, the color of the midnight blue uniform. And it seemed to be that one song is kind of like identifies jurisprudence as a black nation involving jurisprudence. Even the secrets of the temple and the history of the U.S. $1 below the equator, involving the District of Columbia. Not limited to, but considering that the U.S. dollar reflects geographically Washington, D.C. is about that. Well, okay, well, I'm not from Columbia, okay? And I don't have to be, okay? I don't have to be a Colombian just because I've been in the bank, okay, in like North America, okay? Or be a national security issue as a deed restriction based upon signing or endorsing an entire employment history. Signing a release obligation as a forfeiture as a deed restriction, as a carbon footprint, using biometrics as a carbon footprint. Yeah, and yeah, and a mechanics lien, yeah. Yeah, so like in any case, so like it seemed to me that all that information had identified, you know, with the black velvet, that little boy, small black velvet, and that soul southern style. It's more, it's like the M is in, the N is M, the M is in, 13 is 14, 14 is 13, is like 55, at a 90 degree. It's like reading Japanese from top to bottom, and English from left to right that way, and it seemed to be that one thing about, you know, the two letters in the middle of the alphabet being switched, and, you know, as a point of origin, being, you know, M is N is M, 13 is 14, 14 is 13 is ultimately, you know, 55, heaven and sky, and that at a 90 degree puts the isometric, you know, altitude, and amphibious perception that way. And what the equator is at a 90 degree, and the fish swimming upstream, it's like the ladder of the equator at a 90 degree, like a point of origin in military time. In my mind, it seemed to be, you know, the deal about the ladder and coordinates that way of a 90 degree. It seemed to be like a point of origin somewhere in military time that way. Almost like with the MSN, like in alphanumeric, linguistic alphanumerics at a 90 degree, representing, you know, like Paraland being 71 in Japanese, and ultimately some factors involving attenuation and quantum and structure that way. And the sigma alpha delta kappa phi seem to be the thing about the 23. The W and the G, excuse me, the W and the G, okay, seem to be the thing about Vantage Love 30. Because, I mean, where it seemed to have mattered most going through a circuit was like some of the most hardest durations that, you know, while I was going through it, of being taken to the being venue of human civil rights in different locations in Geneva, Switzerland. I mean, I didn't even know really where I was at the time until, I mean, years later, seeing something about it on the news at the same location, and then I'd realized where I'd been, and it seemed to be the thing about Vantage Love 30, and predominantly a 30-year period of some really intense air raids and being gas and aerated, and it's kind of like it doesn't even compute as to any real thing other than memory minus the fact of being 35 or human capital, or, you know, thought about Austin Powers, Blue Bonnet, Imperial Eagle. And the memory minus the fact of, I mean, it seemed to be, you know, really the thing about knowing that eternal treasuries of the military would probably already know that memory not even recognized as an issue, and then realizing over that long being some rejuvenating factors of like television hints and clues and like on YouTube and television, world news, national news, and local news. It's kind of like reactivated, kind of like a memory going through the Stargate program. And then when I realized that that memory had been like a extremely huge thing for a 6 to 9 month period, looking right now, really even like an entire year. But anyway, yeah, so like I continually say that, but I'm actually trying to keep it, because the reason why I do is because, you know, I don't want to, you know, omit it as or as some idea of segmented in different videos. Normally I wouldn't be talking about this really at all. I'd be like, you know, doing my music videos and getting progressively into my own original music, which seemed to be, you know, kind of like a not cool, frustrating situation about having equipment and seemingly, you know, continually, whether or not if access is just a thought of, you know, loss prevention, and you know, the thing that really seemed to be is that this county road is 107. Every road in this neighborhood, I think there's like 7 or 8, county road 107, then 107A, all the way to like G, and it like alternated, and it's like it alternated between the 107G and the 107H, and it seemed to be ultimately, the thing about the silence of two letters combined in the word light, seemingly they have the significance of certain information that had even been my thought of like Robert E. Rubin of like him being the United States Secretary of Treasury, ultimately even light scribe and a bunch of like white stuff and invisible programming, beyond like biometrics. Yeah, so like it seemed to be, something about, the Secretary. I mean his soul seemingly in that way, in many ways, being his involvement in Citigroup in Detroit, likewise, General Motors and how that seemed to be, the headquarter that originates, the hugest, the de facto, whether it be litigation or, annuity or settlement or, what lifespan is in de facto that way. And it seemed that General Motors is predominantly the ones that like really dominated in Detroit. Well, Robert E. Rubin, okay, is like the United States Secretary of Treasury, and his involvement with Citigroup before he actually went into the Washington, D.C., to be the United States Secretary of Treasury. It's kind of like following information with like Wall Street Journal, with like Robert E. Rubin, because his name, his alphanumerics, being 147, like a telepathic judge, or his name being 147. And the thing with it is that, his name Reuben, E. Reuben, it's kind of like one of the 12 tribes of Israel in my mind, the way it's spelled in the King James Version Bible, as like one of the tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel being like the tribe of Reuben, which is the tribe of scribes, okay, like even the, Secretary of Treasury, okay. Yet at the same time, Robert E. Reuben's name, okay, is E. Reuben, yet it's still pronounced the same, but, with the E in the way it's spelled in the King James Version Bible, it has the E in the last name of like the tribe of Reuben, okay? Reuben being like 64, then E. Reuben with the E alphanumerically would be like 69, okay? Like Texas and Jehovah and, all the stuff about 69, even below the equator, and Mexico, that's the thing about Texas and New Mexico power now. But anyway, yeah, so like I was kind of like wanting to think about that, because I've been like going backwards and forwards and kind of get like seriously like sidetracked in a whole different direction quite a bit. I do that really. I don't really intend on it, but like I start out like trying to think about the American Express, because it seemed to be the thing about financial institutions. Kind of like financial institutions like throwing their it's kind of like having fair use of like carbon footprints and absentee voting in the form of like intellectual property, having fair use but not claiming ownership of the rights. It's kind of like all this contesting factor about me having American Express. It's like a bunch of silence and a bunch of nothing. I'm actually going to have to go there and quit talking on the phone, because it's like it's so like already like far beyond like not cool talking to anyone on the phone about it. Yeah, so like it's almost like whether or not of citizenship and birthrights. It's like some idea of like some like FDIC claim of loss prevention as having fair use of my own information. And to present all this issue, like there's a national security issue. Well, there's not. Well, don't you want there to be? Are you kidding me? Loss prevention is what, a deed restriction, absentee voting, over deed restriction over television programming. You kidding me? As compared to like a commercial venue of living quarter, or something like ideal, like going beyond the thought of Charles Barkley's statement, anything less would be uncivilized. It's kind of like the monetary domestic of like the aggregates of like neighborhoods as compared to the gross national product that goes beyond the neighborhood into the commercial venue. Yeah. So like anyway, so like I think about that because it's kind of like it's going to get to whether or not if family law is kind of like it presents. Okay, here's the thing. The way I've been thinking about, Ulysses S. Grant and a student loan combined with a Pell Grant or foster granting or adoption. It's kind of like monopolizing capitalization. It's kind of like I was thinking about Route 66 in several Avalanche Z66 in the World Trade Center. And it seemed that all that information, it seemed that combining a suit along with a pilgrim, I mean, it presents all the presents, okay? It's kind of like a PG-13 rating of presidential governors, yet parental guidance, and a pro-golf association, and the PG being, alphanumeric 23. And the thing it is that, the 23 English alphabetical letters involving the acronyms of the highest levels of like graduates from like digital signal processing, special effects of waveform and electronic engineering involving audio production, not limited to, but that Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi, if I'm not mistaken, is is the the thing about the graduates about that digital signal processing and like electronic engineering, special effects and waveform and quantum, and the international electronic engineering involving like sequencing and some real brains about it. Yeah. So like anyway, so like I was kind of like thinking about that because it's 23, and it seemed to be the significance of each of those acronyms have like 5 letters in each acronym, except for the last one being the 5 PHI, which only has a 3. But it seemed to be the significance of like even Michael Jackson's initials being MJ being 23. And the thing about like George W. Bush seemed to be some idea of a transition, after the William Jefferson Clinton and Al Gore administration. I always say Chevy Chase about the 1992 presidential inaugural ball. About the additives of preservatives and byproducts is where it seemed to be about that. But the thing with this is that the 23 and the 7 is kind of like the Vantage Love 30, and it seemed to be the B in venue not having the letter G in being, and just the BEIN being alphanumeric 30 or Vantage Love 30, and the B in venue being about human civil rights. It ultimately gets to like the human capital side. It's seemingly the human capital side of beyond a method of banking of investment terminology, more so on the expenditure side. And that's the way I see, the being venue. And that was like one of the locations I was taken to. There was like several other locations that I wasn't actually aware of where I was at the time, I mean, it really happened that way, but, 20, 25 years later, going close to 30 years, seeing something on television and realizing that memory had been an issue that long previously before, predominantly, like 1994, 95, and 96, 97 and 98, but yeah, so it seemed to be that predominantly those 3 years and thinking about the 6 to 9 month period, possibly even an entire year. But anyway, yeah, so like anyway, I'm kind of like, it's already going on 33 minutes, and I kind of like going to take my time and do what I do anyway, and maybe take a look at maybe covering some more information. But I just wanted to include that about the American Express because it seemed to be the significance of the rainbow. It seemed to be that card, the American Express Bluebird card, the Bluebird bus, and the AirBusH160. And all the information, in studying linguistic alphanumerics, ultimately, anyone studying it will ultimately get into National Geographic and, the globalization and more so likely the international financial management side of, like, SAN software. And then realizing, that even SAN software, it presents the international financial management, but it doesn't really present it as like a protected U.S. patent. It's even being naive to that as a vice president network. It's kind of like like all that information as a vice president network involving SAN software, or what the kernel is that way in SAN software, and computer programming in the Ajax language and the kernel involving whether a partition is only a quadrant or not, or what the real issue is. Involving telekinetic roll the pen is really ultimately what it seemed to be, involving the Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shuttle Government Stargate program, and ultimately in 9 degrees the Lincoln Continental Hood Ornament, and it's automatically the Lincoln Continental Hood Ornament. It's the International Financial Management Hood Ornament, you know. So and you know what that is at a 90 degree. But anyway, yeah. So I just wanted to kind of like include that, and I'm gonna take a break, okay? So like there it is, okay.